You ever have one of those moments where time doesn't just stop, it shatters? For me, it wasn't something dramatic like thunder or sirens. No, it was quiet. Just a knock on my front door. Light. Soft. Like it didn't even want to be heard. Just a landlord doing a routine check, he said. But I'll never forget the way my stomach turned the second I opened it. You know that feeling when your life is already barely hanging on and then something happens that pulls that last thread loose? That was me. I wasn't just behind on rent. I was behind on everything. Hope, dignity, peace of mind. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. My fridge was nearly empty. My phone stayed on silent, not because I wanted peace, but because I was dodging bill collectors. And friends I didn't have the energy to lie to anymore. I had lost my job 3 months before. Layoffs. Nothing personal, they said. But when the checks stopped coming, everything started to unravel. I went from scrolling job sites to Googling how to sell your plasma, to wondering if being invisible meant no one would notice if I disappeared altogether. And then came that knock. Mr. Clay, my landlord. He was older, well-kept, always dressed sharp, like he had somewhere important to be even when he was just collecting rent. And there I was, in an oversized hoodie I'd worn 3 days straight, hair matted, eyes tired. I didn't even want to open the door. But I did. Just checking on the pipes, he said with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He always smiled like that, like he knew something I didn't. Or worse, like he was waiting for me to realize it. I should have said no. Should have told him to come back later. But you know what happens when you're desperate? You stop drawing lines. You stop thinking in shoulds. You just survive. That knock? It wasn't just a landlord. It was a signal. A moment that split my life in two. Before and after. Because what happened next? I never imagined I'd be the kind of woman with that kind of story. But here I am, and I'm telling it now not for sympathy, not for judgment, but because maybe, just maybe, someone out there is drowning too. And maybe this story helps them breathe again. If you've ever made a choice you swore you never would. If you've ever looked in the mirror and barely recognized yourself, then stay. Listen. Feel it all with me. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where silence becomes story, and the things we're too afraid to say out loud finally get heard. You're not alone. Let's begin. My name's Nina. I'm 27. And lately, I've been feeling like I'm 87. Tired in places I didn't even know could hurt. Tired of pretending I'm okay. Tired of holding myself together with duct tape and denial. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the top floor of an old building that used to be full of families. Now it's mostly quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think loud thoughts. The walls are thin here. You can hear couples arguing through the vents. Babies crying through the pipes. But in my unit, it's just silence. Echoes of what used to be dreams, I guess. I moved here right after college. Thought it would be temporary. Thought life would pick up faster than it did. I had a marketing job back then. Nothing fancy, but steady. Then layoffs hit like a wrecking ball through my plans. It's been 3 months since I got that "we regret to inform you" email. I read it 5 times before it even sank in. Since then, every day's been a balancing act between panic and pretending. Smiling when I text my mom, laughing at memes while skipping meals, filling out job applications like they're lottery tickets. Shame has a smell, you know? It smells like old leftovers and sweat on clothes you've worn too long. It sticks to you, makes you feel small. And when the rent reminder slipped under my door that month, I knew I'd run out of places to hide. Enter Mr. Clay. He's in his 40s, maybe mid-40s. Always in a crisp button-up, slacks, and that cologne that's just strong enough to linger. He's the kind of man who makes you stand straighter without realizing it. Tall, confident, handsome in that clean-shaven, well-moisturized way. But there's something else. Something behind his eyes. Something cold. Calculated. He smiles often. But never with his eyes. only with his teeth. Like he's rehearsed it. Like it's a costume. And the way he talks to me, it's never overt. Always careful. Measured. He says things like, I know things are tough, Nina. If you ever need to talk, or need anything at all, just knock. His voice is warm. But the way he looks at me? It's like he's already decided what I'll do next. There's this thing he does when he hands me my rent receipts. He lets his fingers linger just a moment longer than necessary. A fraction too long. Enough to notice. Enough to make my skin crawl. But not enough to call out without sounding paranoid. He once said, "You've got those eyes, Nina. Like you're hiding something behind them." I laughed awkwardly. But I felt exposed. That's the thing about power. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes it knocks gently on your door with a smile. Mr. Clay owns the building. I owe him 2 months' rent. He knows that. I know that. And with every knock, every stare, every pause in his speech, he reminds me without ever saying a word. The other tenants mostly keep to themselves. A tired-looking woman downstairs who smokes more than she talks. An elderly man across the hall who watches TV all day with the volume on blast. No one asks questions. No one knocks unless they need something. I used to feel safe here. Now I double-check the locks before I sleep. Not because I'm scared of strangers, but because sometimes familiarity is the scariest thing of all. And the worst part? Some nights, when I lie awake in the dark, I think about knocking on his door first. It was a Wednesday. Late afternoon. I hadn't showered yet. I'd been curled up on the couch scrolling through job boards like it was a ritual. Click, click, hope, click, disappointment. The light outside was fading, casting shadows through the blinds. I remember the exact moment because of the knock. 3 short taps. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just certain. I wasn't expecting anyone. No deliveries. No friends. Nobody ever really came by anymore. And when I peeked through the peephole and saw Mr. Clay standing there with 2 men behind him, my stomach dropped. Like something heavy had just settled inside me, and I didn't know why yet. I hesitated. Thought about pretending I wasn't home. But then I remembered. I hadn't locked the deadbolt that day. And I knew he'd probably heard the TV. My hand moved to the knob like it didn't belong to me. And I opened the door. Mr. Clay smiled that same hollow smile, like we were old friends catching up. "Hey, Nina," he said. "Sorry to just drop in. We're checking for a leak from the unit above. Might be dripping into yours." His voice was calm. Too calm. Like a practice host, not a landlord. The 2 men behind him stood quietly, one with a toolbox, the other with nothing at all. They didn't look like plumbers. Or maintenance. They looked like men who didn't need a reason to be somewhere. I stepped aside without a word, instinct overriding discomfort. That's what survival mode does. You stop asking questions and start calculating risk. They walked in. Mr. Clay first. The 2 guys followed, looking around like they were sizing up more than just the ceiling. One of them, tall, lean, wearing a faded jacket, froze when he saw me clearly. "Wait, don't I know you?" he asked, pointing at me like I was a memory he hadn't quite placed yet. I gave a half smile, that polite one you give when you're trying to escape a moment fast. "Used to work over at Millen Marketing," I mumbled. "Downtown." His face lit up. "That's it. You were on the social team, right? Damn. Thought you moved up or something." He chuckled. "Guess not." That hit harder than I let show. I laughed too, but it was empty. My cheeks burned. I felt like I was being peeled open in my own home. Mr. Clay glanced over at me then. His smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes sharpened, like he'd just filed that bit of information away. They wandered the space for a while, tapping walls, running water in the bathroom. It didn't feel like an inspection. It felt like a performance. And I was the audience. Or maybe the act. At one point, the guy with no tools opened my fridge like he owned the place. "You got wine?" he asked, already pulling out the half-finished bottle I'd been saving for a night when I could finally breathe. Mr. Clay looked at me. "Join us, Nina? You look like you could use a glass." I shook my head quickly. "No, thank you." Voice flat. Controlled. But the man with the jacket poured anyway, handed 2 glasses to the others, and leaned against my counter with a smirk. "You know, there's more than one way to cover rent these days." I froze. Just for a second. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said it. Casual. Like he was talking about the weather. Like my dignity was just another bill on the table. Mr. Clay laughed, not loudly. "Just enough." "Ignore him," he said, glancing at me. "He jokes too much." But he didn't sound offended. He sounded entertained. The other man just raised his glass, smiling like this was all part of some inside game I hadn't agreed to play. I stood there, pretending not to feel the room tightening around me. Like the air itself was holding its breath. It wasn't just awkward. It was dangerous. Not in an obvious way, but in that quiet, creeping sense that something had shifted. That I had been seen as something less. Or maybe as something available. And the strangest part? Underneath the disgust was something I didn't want to admit. A flicker of curiosity, not about them, but about myself. About what I was willing to tolerate just to feel noticed again. Just to feel like I had a choice, even if it was a terrible one. They left after a while. No real inspection done. No leak found. Just laughter. Empty glasses. And silence. As the door clicked shut behind them, I locked it twice and leaned against it like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wine stain on my counter. And I thought, this wasn't just a visit. It was a warning. Or maybe an invitation. That night, I barely slept. I laid on my side, curled into myself like I could fold small enough to disappear into the sheets. My apartment felt different. Not just messy or cold, but invaded. Like the walls had watched everything and were now silently judging me. I kept replaying their words. That look. That laugh. That suggestion dropped like it was nothing. There's more than one way to pay rent. The way they said it, like I was already halfway there. Like part of me had already agreed. I told myself I was overthinking it. That I was just tired. That it was just a weird visit and nothing more. But something deep down knew better. Something told me the visit wasn't random. It was planned. Or worse, it was a test. And I'd failed. Not because I did anything, but because I didn't leave. I didn't speak up. I didn't throw them out or slam the door. I just stood there, letting it all happen like a background character in my own life. I thought about calling my sister. We haven't talked much in the last year. Not since I skipped Christmas dinner to avoid another conversation about how I never follow through and how I need to get serious about life. She meant well. But love wrapped in criticism still cuts. And my parents? They've always been the kind to help, but with a price. "We'll send you money, but you need to come home. We'll cover rent, but you have to promise to go back to school." And I couldn't do it. Not the calls. Not the explanations. Not the shame of telling them I'd failed again. So I kept quiet. Alone. And in that silence, the rationalizations began. It was just attention. He didn't touch me. I'm still in control. I'd heard other women say those things before, usually with regret in their voices. Now it was me whispering them in the dark, trying to make the weight on my chest feel lighter. But it didn't go away. I remembered past relationships. Men who only loved me when I was easy to love. Who disappeared the moment I cried too much or wanted too deeply. I remembered being cheated on by someone who said I was too emotional. I remembered begging someone to stay when they were already halfway out the door. I remembered how disposable I'd always felt. And now, here I was, disposable again. But this time, with a price tag. My phone buzzed around 11:03 that night. Just a text from a number I already knew too well. "Mr. Clay, you looked beautiful today. Wish you'd join us next time." I stared at it for a long time. Didn't reply. Didn't delete it either. I just read it over and over, each time feeling something twist in my gut. It wasn't what he said. It was how it made me feel. Wanted. Even if it wasn't real. Even if it came with strings. Even if it was rooted in power, not care. The next morning, I woke up to a soft thud by the door. I opened it, and there it was. A plain white envelope. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in cursive I didn't recognize. Inside was cash. A lot more than I expected. Enough to cover 1 month's rent. Maybe 2 if I skipped groceries. And a small folded note. Just a token. No strings. Unless you want them. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even tear it up. I just sat there on the floor, staring at it like it held a mirror to a version of me I hadn't met yet. The version that wanted to say no. The version that didn't want to give in. The version that was losing the fight. Because when your back's against the wall, and there's no job, no help, no hands reaching for you, except the ones you swore you'd never take. What do? And worse, what if part of you doesn't hate the idea? It sat on my table for 2 days. That envelope. I didn't touch it again, but I didn't throw it away either. I just watched it, like it might vanish. Or grow teeth. I kept telling myself it wasn't a transaction. That maybe it really was just a gesture. A power play, maybe. A test of pride. But I knew better. I knew the moment I tucked that money into the back of my kitchen drawer, behind old batteries and expired coupons, that a door had opened. And part of me had stepped through. 2 nights later, he texted again. Dinner? Nothing formal. Just talk. Just us. I stared at the message for 10 full minutes. My thumb hovered over the screen like it could stop time. And then, without thinking too hard, because thinking too hard would have broken me, I typed back, okay. I told myself I was going to get clarity. To talk about rent. To draw a line. But deep down, I think I knew I wouldn't. I think I knew the moment I picked out the black sweater that clung to my hips, the one I hadn't worn in months, that I wasn't going to talk boundaries. His apartment was 2 floors below mine. Bigger, cleaner, warmer. The table was already set. 2 glasses. Red wine breathing on the counter. And that same scent he always wore, earthy, masculine, expensive, wrapped around everything like a second skin. He greeted me with a smile. One that looked a little less rehearsed this time. You look lovely, he said, handing me a glass. I thanked him, quietly, pretending I hadn't practiced my own smile in the mirror on the way down. We talked. At first, it was light. Safe. Work. The city. He asked about my old job. Told me he always thought I was smart. Too smart to be stuck here, he said. The way he looked at me when he said that, it stirred something. Not attraction. Not yet. Just awareness. The wine helped. Loosened my shoulders. Softened the shame. The way he listened made me feel like I mattered again. And after months of feeling invisible, that's dangerous. Feeling seen? It's intoxicating. We laughed about nothing. Talked about everything. And just when I started to relax, there was a knock on his door. I froze. He didn't. It's just Rick, he said, already walking over. He drops by sometimes. Rick. One of the men from that day. The one who made the joke. The one who opened my fridge like it was his. He stepped in like he owned the place. Nodded at me like we were old friends. Didn't mean to interrupt, he said. But his eyes said otherwise. Mr. Clay didn't ask him to leave. He poured him a drink instead. And suddenly, it wasn't just dinner anymore. It was something else. Something murkier. The 3 of us sat in the living room. Wine turned to laughter. Laughter turned to little touches. A hand on my knee when I said something funny. A compliment about my skin. My hair. My mouth. I should have left. I should have stood up, said no, said this is too much. But I didn't. I laughed too. I leaned in too. Because there's a difference between wanting something and wanting to be wanted. At one point, Rick reached to brush a strand of hair from my face. His hand lingered. I flinched but didn't pull away. Mr. Clay watched it happen. Said nothing, just sipped his wine and smiled like he'd seen this before. I left before midnight. Said I was tired. No one stopped me. But when I stood, Mr. Clay pressed a small envelope into my hand. Just in case, he said. You've earned a little ease tonight. I didn't open it right away. I walked home slowly, my breath fogging in the cold. The money felt warm in my coat pocket, but heavier than it should have been. When I got back to my apartment, I sat in front of my bathroom mirror and looked at myself for a long, long time. Who am I becoming? I whispered out loud. No answer. Just my reflection. Still. Silent. Smudged around the eyes. I opened the envelope. More cash. More than last time. Neatly folded. Crisp. I told myself it was survival. That I hadn't crossed any lines. That I was still me. But the next morning, I found another envelope under my door. No note this time. Just cash. And lingerie. Black lace. My size. Brand new. Still in the box. And for the first time, I didn't feel flattered. Or ashamed. I felt owned. There's a point where the lines blur so much, you stop trying to find them. You stop asking where dignity ends and desperation begins. You just move through it, like fog. Like a sleepwalk you don't want to wake up from, because waking up means looking in the mirror. It was the fourth envelope that did it. That changed everything. This one didn't come under my door. Mr. Clay handed it to me himself. Middle of the hallway. Middle of the afternoon. Like it was normal. Like we were normal. There's a unit down the block, he said. Brand new. Private. Just for the night. No pressure. Just you and me. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just stared at him until he nodded, handed me the key, and walked away like the deal had already been made. And maybe it had. That night, I put on the black dress. The one I kept in the back of the closet, the one I used to wear when I still went on dates. When I still believed I could be loved without paying for it in pieces of myself. I walked there. Not a long walk. 7 blocks. Enough time to change my mind. Enough time to let the guilt rise and then bury it again. I told myself it was dinner. Just dinner. Just talking. Just company. The apartment was stunning. Soft music playing. Rose petals scattered. Candles lit across every surface. Champagne already chilled. It didn't look like a place you bring someone to talk. Mr. Clay greeted me with a smile, like none of this was strange. Like he hadn't orchestrated this moment down to the thread count on the sheets. You're even more beautiful than I imagined, he said. I smiled back. Not because I felt beautiful, but because I didn't know what else to do. We toasted. Laughed. Talked like we always did. Low and easy. Voices dipped in something unspoken. I felt like I was drifting. Not floating. Drifting. Like I'd untethered from who I used to be and couldn't remember how to get back. But then, there was another knock. Mr. Clay didn't flinch. Just said, "It's fine. He's cool. He won't stay long." And when the door opened, it was Rick. Again. Same smirk. Same eyes scanning me like I was the entertainment instead of the guest. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said with a grin, stepping in without waiting for permission. That's when it hit me this wasn't dinner. This was a performance. A setup. And I was the show. I wanted to leave. I wanted to scream. But I just stood there, wrapped in candlelight and confusion. I felt something twist in my chest, fear, yes. But not just fear. It was anger too. At them. At myself. At the hunger inside me I couldn't seem to kill. Because even in that moment, with the pressure building and the air too thick to breathe, a part of me still wanted to be wanted. Still clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this could be something else. Something that didn't end with regret. But it didn't feel like that. Not anymore. The room spun slower after that. Or maybe it just felt that way because my mind had already left. I barely remember the rest. The drinks, the music, the hands that didn't ask but didn't need to, the look in Mr. Clay's eyes when he watched me give in, like he was checking off a box. I don't need to describe what happened next. Some things don't need words. You can just feel them. In your bones. In your silence. The next morning, I woke up alone. Wrapped in a silk robe I didn't own. The room still smelled like perfume and champagne and shame. My hand trembled as I clutched the fabric against my skin. Not because I was cold. Because something in me broke that night. But something else awoke. And that part of me? The one that stepped out into the early morning light with rent money in her purse and her reflections splintered into too many pieces to count. She wasn't the same Nina anymore. The change wasn't loud. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in like smoke, slow, quiet, impossible to ignore once it settled in your lungs. I started walking differently, shoulders up, chin a little higher. Not because I felt proud, but because I had to. Because shame feels heavier when it hangs off a bent spine. I started dressing differently too. Tighter clothes, bolder colors. Not because I liked the attention, but because I needed to convince myself I was choosing this. That I still had some kind of control. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Alvarez, the older woman 2 doors down, started looking at me with something between sadness and disgust. Like she knew, but didn't want to know. Like she'd seen this before, in someone else. Maybe in herself. Mr. Clay started showing up more. Texts, calls, sudden drop-bys. He'd knock with that same easy rhythm, always with that smile that no longer looked charming. It looked like ownership. "You good?" he'd say. "Need anything?" And every time I tried to pull back, to create space, he'd lean in just enough and say it, "You owe me, remember?" And yeah, I remembered. Rick and the others didn't stop coming either. They didn't always visit me directly, but their presence lingered. Passing by in the halls, holding stares too long, laughing a little louder when I walked by. My phone never stopped buzzing. At first, I thought it was just Mr. Clay. Then I started seeing new numbers. Unknown contacts. Messages that didn't ask, they instructed. "You available Thursday night? Clay said you were good company." Private. No strings. Cash up front. I'd never signed up for anything. Never made any promises. But somehow, my silence had been taken as consent. One night, I opened my banking app just to transfer money to buy groceries. I stared at the balance for a long time. Not because it was low, but because it wasn't. It had grown. Quietly. Steadily. Line by line. Deposits labeled as gifts, consultations, loans. Each one felt like a bruise I couldn't see, but could feel. I deleted the app. I didn't want to look anymore. Didn't want to keep counting the cost of what I'd become. The worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't the whispers. It wasn't even the men who acted like I was something they could rent by the hour. It was the feeling of being hollow. Like I was walking around with a body that no longer belonged to me. Like every smile I gave was someone else's idea. Like I had become a space people passed through and left things behind. Things I couldn't scrub out. I used to think there were clear lines. You know? Good people. Bad people. Victims. Villains. I used to believe I could spot them from across the room. That I'd always be on the right side of that divide. But what happens when you're all of them at once? What happens when you do things you swore you'd never do? Things that used to make you shake your head at other women, thinking I'd never be her. And then one day, you are. I remember one Sunday morning. I woke up before the sun. No calls. No texts. Just silence. I got dressed in something soft. Something simple. And I went to church. It was the same church I used to pass every week on my way to work, back when I believed in mornings and futures. The sanctuary smelled like old wood and whispers. The pews were half full. Everyone was dressed in quiet colors. A hymn played low from the speakers. I sat in the back, head down, palms resting on my knees like I didn't know what to do with them. The pastor began to speak. Something about redemption. About starting over. About being washed clean. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But halfway through, something inside me cracked. I stood up. Quietly. Left my coat behind. Walked out into the street like it was the only place I still knew how to breathe. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. I was going to write to her. To the version of me that used to laugh without thinking. Who wore yellow just because it was sunny? Who believed love would be gentle and that kindness was enough to be chosen? I wrote 3 lines before I started crying. You don't deserve what's coming, but you'll survive it anyway. Then I ripped it up. Tiny, jagged pieces. Like somehow destroying the letter would also destroy the shame. I've thought about running. Starting over. Packing a single bag and vanishing. Becoming someone new in a city where no one knows my name. But I don't move. I don't run. Because survival isn't always about escape. Sometimes, it's just about learning how to sit inside your own ruins without screaming. Rent's paid. Fridge is full. Closet growing. But my soul? It's in overdraft. And there's no receipt for what I've lost. Have you ever traded a part of yourself just to make it through another month? Not your body, necessarily. But your peace. Your sleep. Your reflection in the mirror. I'm not asking for judgment. I've already given myself more of that than I can carry. I'm asking for something harder. Understanding. Because sometimes it's not about right or wrong. It's about being stuck in a place where every option feels like surrender. You ever lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a few small choices could break you in so many different ways? Not all at once. Just one crack at a time, until you're sitting in silence, surrounded by everything you never meant to become. If any part of this story lives somewhere in you, if you've made choices out of fear, not desire, if you've silenced your own no, just to be wanted, just to be safe, then I want to hear from you. Share your truth in the comments. No shame. No masks. Just a space for honesty. If this story reached a place you've never put into words, let it sit with you for a moment. Let yourself feel it. And if you're still here, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where silence turns into stories too heavy to carry alone. Tap the bell. The next tale, it might echo something you've never dared say aloud. Some debts don't show up on paper. They don't come with due dates or overdraft fees. They just weigh, heavy, quiet. Some landlords don't need keys to own you. All they need is a moment of weakness. A moment when you needed something more than you needed yourself. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't the man at your door. It's the voice in your head whispering, "This is all you're worth." I don't know who needs to hear this, but you're not what happened to you. You are not your most desperate moment. You are not your silence. You are not your survival strategy. If you're still watching, ask yourself, how far would you go to feel needed? To feel seen? To stop feeling like nothing at all? We all pay rent in this life, but some of us, we pay in ways no one ever sees. And if this story was yours, even in part, I see you. You're not alone. Not here. Not anymore.